What's up guys, Truman here, welcome back to another video. I actually finished recording a video, well started to record a video and then thought better of it, talking about my experience on psychedelics and my opinion on it. However, I realized that it's probably better to talk about that stuff when you have a free house. Today I'm going to be talking about another mini epiphany that I had. I think this is similar to the one that I had before, is that basically there is no such thing as the external world from the perspective of the ego. Now, bear with me for a second. I did actually start off making some videos about the law of attraction and stuff like that, and I know that I already do have a lot of opinions about spirituality and the ego and a lot about philosophy. So I decided to basically continue on that sort of line because I used to do a lot of philosophy and just a bit too much of acid. And so I have a lot of opinions on actually like the ego. Now, I wasn't a crackhead, by the way. It's just a long past, and I think it really spurred me on to think about a lot of like deep philosophical issues that I don't usually get a chance to usually flesh out, let alone properly have like a real good debate with, which is what I used to have. So what do I mean when I say that there's no such thing as the external world? Because when you say that to someone, the first reaction is, of course there's an external world. I can touch this microphone cover, I can touch the table, I can see all this other stuff. Now, this is why I said that there is no such thing as the external world from the perspective of the ego. Basically, the ego is the little ghost in between the sensory input and your body. It is the thing that basically sees it and then perceives it. And the ego decides how to basically react to the information that is coming in. And all of these decisions and all of these belief systems make up your own personal consciousness. So if you think that, you know, the sky is blue, or if you think that, you know, God is real, or your opinions on this, or, you know, I hate spiders and my favorite color is black, and, you know, stuff like that. That's all weird. I've never seen someone that actually has a favorite color as that. If your favorite color is that, let me know so I can document you for science. And the ego takes all of this sensory input and it makes its decisions based on such sensory input. However, there's a bit of a difference between who you are on the inside and the actual external world, because the external world, in my opinion, I don't think can be perceived without there being an ego perceiving it. What I find, like, for example, animals are in sort of a different state. There is no ego in an animal. There is nothing that says this is there, therefore I have an opinion on this and I'm going to change this and the other. What you see is a more biological on and off switch there. They're in what I call a solid state consciousness, and solid state basically means that everything is there. There is no separation. All of the hardware is built into one thing. It's not like different component parts, which is what you find in the ego. So there is no one or no thing inside of an animal or a plant that basically can take in the sensory input and then form an opinion on it. There are automatic responses, the same thing in humans, but there's no cat that says, that porridge kind of smells weird, I should probably tell the owner to buy me some new stuff. There's nothing that's basically going on in there. So when the ego gets involved, this is where it gets a bit difficult, because we form our belief systems based on what we've been told, like I said. However, all of the sensory input could not be perceived. You could not know that you are looking at something without the ego being there. And from that perspective, I think that there is no such thing as the external world. The whole external world is inside of your own head. Everything that you perceive is literally the internal world. There is no external world that you are perceiving. It's all sensory information, it's all input, and all of it is being filtered in through belief systems, which, let's face it, are quite frankly bunk. Now, I think this really, when I had that, it really did benefit me in a way, is that what I find is that when we get hooked into a belief system, that belief system is no different from the light, I think, that shines into our eyes, or the perception of the light. Looking and perceiving and making an opinion about something are basically the same thing from the perspective of the ego. So when I understood this, it made it a lot harder for me to get into some of these more negative mindsets and negative mind spaces that I find myself inhabiting, because it's basically like saying, everything that I see and all the opinions are basically in my own head. Nothing that I'm seeing is actually real. Everything is going on basically back here. So it made it a lot harder for me to really pin down a lot of the belief systems that I have and really project them out and really think that they're real. Now, I personally believe that everything that we believe is nonsense. Everything is a game. Nothing from the perspective of the ego is real. Because two people looking at a single object can think totally different things. What we think is real, and this is why the ego is so arrogant and it thinks that everything it thinks is real, is because it needs to in order to survive. It needs to have a set specific things like this is safe, that is not safe, I can do this, I can do that. And it's really fear that keeps the ego in place and going around and around in circles. Hence why we find that a lot of enlightenment experiences come from extreme and tremendous subjections to fear. And why the preamble to those such said experiences usually does come with the most intense feeling of fear that you can. Hence why people, and this can also go the other way, hence why people go psychotic, because the sensory input, the ego cannot take the reality of the sensory input. So it quite literally fragments and breaks down. And people either get split personality disorder or they literally just become vegetables. It can really be that extreme. And that's the sheer level of the hold that the ego has over what it perceives as the external world. Now, like I said, there is no such thing as the external world. Everything you are perceiving is in your own head. All of your belief systems, what you think about something, you chose to think that. You chose to make those opinions. The issue is that the current state of the ego, the current ego, the predominant ego consciousness that we have, because there's various different types of them, is extremely dysfunctional and extremely neurotic. It doesn't know that it knows that these belief systems are bunk, are basically its own opinions. Otherwise, then it would literally change them at a whim. We can think we know. However, for us to truly internalize that and realize that everything that we know and that we experience is basically a figment of our own imagination that can change any time. Because it's kind of a hard thing to understand, because I know that when I say that, it's like saying, oh, so this mouse isn't real, and if I change my mind, it could turn into a bunny rabbit. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the perception and the opinion of it, because the perception and the opinion of it, and this doesn't have to be thought opinions, these can be our belief systems around it, are the exact same thing. You cannot perceive something that you do not already have a belief system for. If you perceive something that you don't have a belief system for, you either react in fear or you just don't see it at all. Think, for example, I have noticed this a lot, and I find that it actually happens a lot whenever I've had like a real, some sort of a life shift, is that I'm walking down a street that I've always walked down, and I look up at a house that I've been seeing sometimes for years, and I look at it at this different angle that I've never seen it before, and I'm just like, wow, I have never seen it like that. And it's very strange, because I've had this picture and this belief system of what that house is, what it looks like, and even the feelings that I have associated with it, which are very, very subtle, because if you have feelings, if you have a lot of anxiety and you're walking up and down the same street, you will associate that street with anxiety. But I looked at that house and I thought, wow, like this, it's like shifted in perspective, but it's the same thing that you've always seen. And it's that exact principle that I like to apply to whenever I'm doing some sort of psychological work, to a lot of the things that I think are real. It is just a perspective that you're having on what this is, and at any moment it can change. And ultimately, it doesn't actually exist out there. The perspective and the thing, and the belief system and the thing from the perspective of the ego are the exact same things that are inseparable. If you wipe out the ego, then basically there is no perception anymore. Then the internal world and the external world are one, and there is no link between the two. Ultimately, there is no difference between you and the external world. You are literally everything that you see around you. You are the table that you use, you are the seat that you sit on. The only reason why it doesn't seem like that is because there's a separation of density between like my hand and the other hand. Obviously they're linked, but say there's a separation of density, so the same molecules are here, they're condensed. And then it gets a lot more fragmented. There's less and less molecules until there's barely any, and then they sort of condense. But they're the same molecules. It's like being in the same body. This experience and this thing, like we are one, like everything is the same thing. I personally believe, and I might be going a bit off topic, that we have been deliberately programmed to not appreciate this. We have been put into this fear-based mindset whereby we think that what we see and who we are two totally different things. That there is an inseparable wall between you and what you see, and you are just this tiny person going about your day in this vast world. It's like Carl Sagan's Pale Blue Dot video, which is quite famous. it's really romantic and stuff like that, but it's extremely flawed because he starts to say, oh, how we're so insignificant in this vast universe of chaos and all the other stuff. Exactly, but it's basically the same thing. So we're this tiny thing and there's all this crazy stuff that can kill you at any moment. Yeah, by the way, that's also you. You know, it is also you. And that sense is really missed out from a lot of from people's consciousness in general. There are some civilizations that understood this. There are some civilizations that knew that there was no separation. And you find that there are many different, take Buddhism, for example, and many different religions and structures of thinking that basically try and reconnect people with that awareness. And hence why the meditation, when you get really quiet and you try and think, who's the one behind the voice? Who is the one behind the thinking? It actually calms you down because it creates a feedback loop whereby the ego tries to perceive itself. And because it can't perceive itself and it keeps trying, it creates a void. It creates a void because it actually, if you dive even deeper into it, it basically proves that the ego doesn't exist, because when people do this meditation and they really go deep and they actually do it, what happens is that they end up focusing, when they try and focus on the ego, they instead focus on sensory input. So they focus on their hands, they focus on the inside of their head, or they focus on something, but there's always the ego trying to look outward, trying to find the person who is behind, but it can't find anything. All it can find is the external world, which is what it is, and the ego is in fact an illusion. And this is why the meditation is extremely effective. But anyway, to sum it all up, I don't like that. Yeah, there is no such thing as the external world from the perspective of the ego. Perception and belief systems are the same thing, and it's all taking place inside of your own head. If the perception goes, then the internal world and the external world basically become one, and there is no internal and external. The separation is gone. I thought I would add as well is that you have no way of truly interacting with the external world. And this is because, like I said before, the perception and the belief system of the external world are the same thing. And without that perception and without that belief system, there'd be no one to perceive. However, when you do try and perceive something, all you perceive is the belief systems and the sensory input. So everything has already changed. The only way to there is no way. And what am I saying? There is no way to truly interact with the external world. Everything is done through this complex thing of neurons and whatever and sensory input. But then what messes it up even more is the belief systems and the belief structures, which bear absolutely no resemblance to the actual thing, because again, two people can look at the same thing and look at something different. So you're always ever interacting with this like virtual self-created simulation that we use to interact with what we think is the external world, but is actually just our own head and our own belief systems. I hope I've made sense in that, because it's been a while since I've done videos like that where I really said about it, but I'd like to do more of them because it's actually fun talking about, and it's one of those videos that I don't really try too hard to try and pull ideas out of my head. Anyway, Freeman out, and peace.